we're looking at immigration through these public policies and not necessarily the ins and outs of why it happened to these people. But we're going to be looking at four major events through policy and how those policies affected the group, what group was affected, and then how did that policy or action change? How was it corrected over time? So four groups, and I picked four groups that were different as well. So we're going to be, the first group is you're just going to be looking at white Europeans. Then we're going to see African Americans, and then we're going to see Native Americans here, and then the last one you'll see obviously where we'll end up. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. What I want you to do is open up. Sorry. You guys open up the Google Classroom, and then you'll see your note page for today. And I'm going to share so you can see this really well. I'm going to share this with you, share my screen with you. So you can see the picture of Ellis Island. Could I get a head nod? Okay, awesome. All right. So in class, what we would do is we would do what's called a visual discovery, and you guys would have notebooks, and we'd be looking at this, and you would be pulling clues, and then we would talk about it. I'd be playing some music when you walked into class, and then later in class on the note lecture, we would be doing a foldable and a timeline foldable, and you would stick that in your notebook, and it would be a timeline of these four events. But here we are. This is what we'll do instead, okay? This is a picture of an immigrant family. They have arrived on Ellis Island. This is a sort of semi-staged photograph from what we know of it. This is in the early 1900s. This is Ellis Island. Ellis Island was one of two islands, immigration stations. One, Ellis Island in New York, and then there was an Angel Island in San Francisco. So when you were immigrating to the United States, those were the two places that you would, Lily in here, that you would come into. A little fun fact, in 1893, William Ferris created the Ferris wheel, invented the Ferris wheel for the World's Fair. And this was eventually given to New York City, and it sat in New York City for quite some time on Coney Island. And a lot of people think that the first thing immigrants saw was the Statue of Liberty coming to the United States, but actually it was the Ferris wheel that William Ferris had created. So little fun fact for you. All right, so, and I'll share this with you. I just thought this was funny. So what are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at the Alien and Sedition Acts that really affected Irish and other white Europeans early on here in the late 1790s. I'll talk a little bit about why. And then obviously we're going to be looking at African Americans, like I said. And then this one, Oriental immigration, and then we're going to end up with Native Americans, but the timeline is a little skewed, but it'll be okay. All right, so, but here, if you take a look at these pictures, the Irish started coming pretty early on into the United States, and they really started to come by the 1840s. And what you'll see throughout the history of immigration is this demeaning quality of no matter who the group is, trying to demean them, trying to say that they're not educated, trying to say that they're dangerous to society. that they're drunks or alcohol or drugs, that they're criminals. So you can sort of definitely see that with the Irish here. Then obviously we know the plight of African Americans, but this was shared with Orientals as well. And look at the octopus there and sort of read those things on the octopus arm. Some of the very same things you hear about with other groups, right? And groups today with our Latin American cultures, with our immigration, especially over the last 10 to 20 years, is really exploded. And then, so anytime you have a large immigration of people, you're going to experience groups in the United States treating that group like this, unfortunately. Hopefully, we get better. We're supposed to get better. But unfortunately, we just don't learn from our history, and we sort of repeat the same thing. This is a picture of, this is Uncle Sam. This is America. And then this is supposed to be an Irishman eating him, and then an Oriental man eating Uncle Sam, the USA. And then up here, white immigration versus Oriental exclusion. All right. And then, of course, today, when you hear immigration, when we started to talk about this yesterday, it's probably one of the groups that came to mind. You probably did not. Well, maybe you thought of Yikwo. Hopefully, you thought of Yikwo and the Oriental immigration from the video that you looked at. All right. So as a quick review, you know who a citizen is. I beat you over the head with this quite a bit with the 14th Amendment. We got birthright, we got naturalization. You saw a little bit of that naturalization process yesterday. So hopefully have a little bit of a better understanding of what a green card is, what a visa is, what the process is. This is a long process, the naturalization process. You're looking at a minimum in a normal circumstance, without being able to do any of the 52, one of the unique 52 options, you're looking at a minimum of 5 years to become a U.S. citizen. And then it takes some people up to 14, and that is that's after you getting accepted and coming in. There's a wait list there. All right, so four events throughout our history. Here we go. So you got to pull up. And you guys can do this, right? You can pull up, you can still sort of see this, and I'm going to talk you through this. I don't want you to type every word here, okay? So just sort of let me lecture on it for a minute, and then you go, and then we can be like, okay, what are we going to put in our slide, okay? So at the top, let's go the group targeted, white Europeans mainly. And those are Irish, you got some English, but you got a lot of people from France. Group targeted, white Europeans, Irish, English, but mainly groups from France. So I had to get coffee. No, tea, green tea. So what's going on here? Well, you had this group called the Federalist Party, and the Federalist Party had some policies that they implemented, because what the Federalist Party realized was during this time, the people that were immigrating to the United States were becoming Democrat Republicans, all right, from the other political party. So the Federalist Party did not want to lose control of the government. They were in control of Congress. They were writing laws both in the House and the Senate they were in control of, and President John Adams was the president. So they had a lot of political power and authority, and they wanted to keep that for generations. But what they realized was they're not going to be able to if we allow the flood of these white Europeans that were coming into the country, looking around the country, looking at the policies of the two major political parties and going, you know what, I'm going to go with Thomas Jefferson. and the old Democrat Republicans. So they used war and the threat of war and what was going on in Europe. And again, we're not, like I said, we're not a history class, so I don't want to go too deep into this. But the idea that France was not our ally, even though just a few years ago, prior to this, they helped us in the American Revolution. But we sort of realigned with England, and England and France were going through some stuff. And so the Federalists used a war in Europe to create these policies to stoke fear in this country about these immigrants coming here and sort of being terrorist spies, and speaking out against our country. So there was a total of 4 policies, but the 2 that I want you to know and that you need to know for life is the Naturalization Act. And that increased the citizenship wait. So when you came into the country, you only had to wait, you had to wait 5 years. They changed that to 14 years. Well, one of the things about being a US citizen is you get to vote. So once they move the requirement, then now they don't have to worry about all those immigrants for 14 years, okay? So their party will be protected for almost 2 decades. So that was 1. 2, even more, I won't say even more damaging, but even more scary to our political world, is this idea. They called it, they always do this, they always come up with a name that actually means the opposite of the bill, the Alien Friends Act. The Alien Friends Act allowed the president to deport immigrants that were speaking out against the government in any way. And this really hurt newspapers, and people were imprisoned. People were rounded up and put in prison for this. And, we have this thing called freedom of the press. And these ideas, though, freedom of the press and freedom of speech aren't completely worked out yet. Look at the date, 1798. So we would hopefully not allow this to take place today. Although one of our an interesting sort of tie-in, I would say, is, and I told you at the very beginning of the class, I'll never tell you what to believe, but we can maybe sort of take this. Now, this isn't the government doing this. This is a private company like Facebook and Twitter, but Facebook and Twitter knocking off President Trump and a lot of other people. Where is that line, right? Where is that line? And so that's sort of something to think about, especially with the Alien and Sedition Acts. You go, oh crap, that's 1798. That crap don't happen in 2021. You've experienced it over the last couple of weeks. So the medium has changed, the technology has changed, but the idea and the debate on this issue definitely has not. So the targeted group, and then we're going to put targeted how, increased citizenship requirement, 5 to 14. And limited free speech and press, right? So couple sentences there on that left side, how they were targeted. And real quick, here is what happened. Thomas Jefferson wins the presidency despite these actions, or maybe even because of these actions. There was a backlash, again, historical, coming of age in 2021, so that you have this backlash, and Jefferson wins, and the federal government goes back into control of the Democrat Republicans. Some of these acts just simply retire, or they end, they expire, and then some of them were actually repealed, overturned by new laws. The U.S. residency requirement, as you can see, has changed all over the place, but it still currently is 5 years. Today, it is 5 years, but it's gone from 5, 7, 9, 14. All right. Alien and Sedition Acts. The next one we'll deal with is the Dred Scott decision with African Americans. A couple questions here. So we'll go to that next slide. Group targeted, we'll put African Americans. A couple questions. Are slave citizens, can they sue in court? And can they vote? And not only slaves, but just African Americans in general, whether you're in a free state or not. And so look at the date here. This is 1857. And this is going to be considered a landmark decision because it's going to have drastic impacts. And this is right here before the Civil War. Maybe if the Supreme Court had decided this differently, we might not have had the Civil War, maybe. But here's what happened. The court essentially, this guy goes on, he travels with his slave owner to free states and not free states. And he lives in free states at a time with his slave owner. And during this time, he learns to read and write and things like this. And he sues his slave owner and says, listen, I'm living in a free state. You've taken me to a free state, so therefore I'm free. And that's sort of the question is, can he even sue? And then is that true? Can a person that was a slave go into a free state and become free? And you can see there the erroneous and short-sighted rulings. Give you time there to type that. So they could not be American citizens. They had no standing to sue. So Dred Scott, the African-American person that's suing, has no standing to sue in federal court, and nor could they vote. Important note here, just because the Supreme Court is final doesn't mean they're right. And this is a great example of a ruling by the Supreme Court that you can clearly go, just because they're final doesn't mean they're always right. So how do we fix this? How it was fixed was there's a little thing called the Civil War. But then after the Civil War, there were amendments that were passed to the United States Constitution. Amendment, remember, is a change. And we specifically outline a couple of things. These are called the Civil War Amendments, 13, 14, and 15. The 13th Amendment is going to free slaves. 14th Amendment, you know the original intent of that. We've looked at that. And then the 15th Amendment is going to give voting rights to freed slaves. Once this happens, though, we get into a 100-year period from 1860s to the 1960s of states, individual states creating policies. And we go into a Jim Crow South, and we create these individual policies to hold back the African-American population. And then that's why you have the whole civil rights movement. So these started to correct things, and then the states, remember, because we have federalism, so the federal government is correcting, right? But the states, each individual state started creating policies within their states to hold African-American groups back. All right, can I get a head nod from you guys? Are we good there? Just wanted to give you enough time. All right. All right. Well, Mr. Gonzalez, what happens if you have two people in the country that are not documented or illegal, however, whatever term you're using in your home, but they have a child in the United States? Is that child an American citizen? Well, because of the Wong Kim Ark in 1898, we have the answer to that. So this is exactly what happened. This case goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court. They were two Chinese parents and they had a baby that got pictured there. And the question is he an American citizen? Therefore, does he get all the protections, privileges, immunities, due process that other Americans would get? Citizenship automatically, voting automatically. And they looked and they said, this would qualify. They read the Constitution and they interpreted that any baby that was born on US soil, even though they were born to undocumented people, would be considered a US citizen. Fast forward to President Trump's election. During President Trump, 4 years ago, President Trump was using this term, and I still have it here in the slide because I think it's important because we're still so close. And you might hear this term called anchor babies. And so there's this idea that undocumented people are having babies, and those babies were being called, it's a negative term, obviously, and they were being called anchor babies. Here's why President Trump and some were calling them anchor babies. Well, now what do? Are you going to deport the parents and keep the child? Because you can't deport the child. The child is a US citizen, so you're going to put them in DSS custody. We all know how awful DSS custody is, and how overwhelmed they are. So what are you going to do with these kids? And so that's sort of where we're at as far as this idea. And now you have things like the DREAM Act and some other pieces of legislation that President Trump was working on with his party, and now Biden is working some different things, and we're going to get into those. All right, so later on in the course, we're going to be looking at policies, Democrat policies and Republican policies, and to sort of let you see what policies you think are the most important. One little, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because it was wrong to say that he could do it, but President Trump was going to sign this thing called an executive order to change this part of the 14th Amendment, but you can't do that. Executive orders, you can't change amendments by executive order. The only way to change an amendment is to change an amendment with an amendment. All right, Mr. Gonzalez, what about Native Americans? And I flip-flop these. You see these dates, 1880, and the other one was 1889. I flip-flopped them because if you know the answer to this one, then you would have known the answer to the other one. And did I give you time to do that? So the group targeted, we could say Oriental slash babies born, the group targeted Orientals, and then also all babies born to undocumented. How are they being targeted? Groups, just like today, we're trying to make the case that they were not citizens. How it was corrected, 14th Amendment was interpreted in Wong Kim Ark in 1898 to say that they were US citizens. Okay. What about Native Americans? Are they US citizens? Do they have the right to vote? And this is sort of a, like, really, we have to talk about this, like they were here first type deal, but yes. So here's what happened. Here's what goes down. You have this Winnebago Indian. His name is John Elk. And he leaves his reservation. He moves off his reservation in Nebraska, and he speaks English. He pays federal and state US taxes, and he renounces his citizenship to, or his allegiance to, his tribe, and it says, I was born in the United States on American soil, therefore I have birthright citizenship. So I should automatically be a US citizen. Okay. The case comes because Elk tries to go and register to vote in his county, and the voter register's office denies his ability to vote. They say, no, you can't vote. You're Native American, and you don't have citizenship. And he's like, well, I was born here and I speak English, I pay taxes, I'm going to register to vote. And so they deny it. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The question then was, as you see there on that last slide, are they US citizens, or do they owe their allegiance to their Native American tribes, and therefore they're not US citizens because they're on they're Native American reservations and therefore not on American soil? So group targeted Native Americans. How are they being targeted? They're not being, how they're being targeted, they are not being allowed to consider themselves US citizens. And here is another example of the Supreme Court having the final say with the interpretation, but not the correct say. They said, the Supreme Court said Native Americans owe their allegiance to their tribe and not to the United States, and therefore were not considered to have dual citizenship, meaning tribal citizenship and American United States citizenship. Pretty crazy, right? Literally born in the United States. So how is this corrected? It takes a while. You can see there. This happens, this case takes place in 1880s, and we don't have a correction until 1920s. But here's how it was corrected. Write down, type in Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. And then essentially what you can just put there is that all citizens that are Native Americans that are born within the United States they automatically have dual citizenship. So the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 automatically gives dual citizenship. This is 1920s. So in a lot of states, just like African Americans and non-whites, this group was also still targeted even after this decision. And they're going to have to fight. States still tried to limit their voting rights and their political voice. However, by the 1940s, because of World War I and World War II, you had Native American groups like the Navajo and the Navajo Code Talkers that become so famous in this country, and there's a interesting shift with Native Americans during this time, and even now in the United States, where white people love to say that they're like part Native American, and so this romanticizing of Native American culture within white culture has sort of blended, but in the 1920s, it was not like that. But after World War I and World War II, it sort of becomes this idea of a romanticized Native American. And then especially, I added that link for you. If you want to see what I'm talking about with the Navajo Code Talkers, go ahead and you can watch that 3-minute video. But that's how they fixed it, 1924 civil rights legislation for Native Americans. All right, so those are our 4 major historical immigration policy. The biggest thing, maybe I would want you to get out of me teaching this to you is just a broader perspective of immigration policy in the United States. Is not just about what we're living in right now with Hispanic in Latin American culture. This has been going on since literally we have invented ourselves. And a weird dynamic, right? We love to say that we are e pluribus unum, out of many one, but yet we like completely trash the groups that are coming into the country. It's almost like initiation. Like, do you really want to be here? So every single time, but yet every single time since we're here and we're looking back, we go, wow, it's a beautiful salad bowl of culture. So maybe next time, with whatever group comes in next that starts to really try to come in large numbers, we can sort of take a little historical and policy perspective and not make the same mistakes over and over again. All right. So that's going to end us for today. You have no outside work because you stayed with me so long. You just have that. All you got to do, hopefully, is just press submit. Do we have any questions? Do you miss something that you need me to go back and tell you real quick? All right. You guys are awesome. Hey, thanks for waking up and hanging out with me and learning a little bit. And I will see you Monday.